Hey listeners, this is your host Laura. Just a heads up, the audio for this episode is a little bit rough. I don't know if it was my mic or his mic or both of them together. I did a lot of editing on the audio, more than I ever have on any other episode, but it's really still not as smooth as I would like, so please forgive the remaining errors. And I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Good morning, and welcome to Homegrown KC, a podcast dedicated to exploring Kansas City's fascinating history and sharing stories from its rich past. I'm your host, Laura. Joining me today is Phil Dixon. Hi.
Hey, good morning.
So, I asked you to come on because you are an internationally known author and researcher of the Negro League Baseball. And I thought originally we should save this for June because, like baseball season, but it also really fits Black History Month.
Yeah, it's a good.
Well, let's just dive right in. What is your story?
Yeah, well,
where do you come from? How did you get interested in this?
Well, I'm originally from Kansas City, Kansas, so I'm out of the metropolitan area. And I just grew up as a kid who loved baseball, but my first fascination with baseball came from collecting baseball cards. And I kind of ended up getting to the collecting bit by accident. When I was in the second grade, I was installed with the Beatles. And so I was collecting Beatles cards. It was 1964. And I took my cards to school, made a mistake, and the teacher said, "These are toys," and she took my Beatles cards. So when I went back...
Oh, no.
Yeah, I know. Bad deal. And when I went back to the store to buy some more, they were all sold out. And the only thing left was baseball cards. And so I started collecting baseball cards in the second grade, and by the time I was 20 years old, I had over 100,000 baseball cards. I was pretty serious about it. And back in those days,
wow,
you just go into the store and buy a set. It wasn't like that. You had to buy these 5-cent packs with the gum and that kind of thing, or hopefully maybe some teenager will find out about girls and you can get his cards, and you can build up your collection. So that's kind of what I did. And that was the beginning of my love for baseball.
But then, how did you end up getting interested in the Negro League?
Well, I loved baseball. I played baseball. I read all the books. And let's see, probably about 1980, I was probably about 22, 23. I ran into a guy in Topeka named Carol Ray Moffett. And he began to tell me about the Negro Leagues and World Series and the Kansas City Monarchs. And I was pretty well-read baseball fan, but I didn't know any of this history. And it was African-American sports history as well. And so it intrigued me. So it's kind of like in honor of Mr. Mopper, who died shortly thereafter. I started to write my first histories related to the Negro Leagues. Now, at that particular time, there was only about 2 or 3 books out. Of course, there was no Negro League Baseball Museum or anything like that. So I was way ahead of the curve, but it's because of Mr. Mopple who piqued my interest. Now, I had heard about the Kansas City Monarchs. I would run into old guys who say they played for the Monarchs, but I never had anyone sit down and talk to me like Mr. Mopple.
So you got started on this pretty early then. Did you know right away that this was it for you? This was your calling?
Well, I knew that it was a history that needed to be told. It needed to be told. And I just felt like me being a baseball fan and just loving the game, that it's something that I should do. And plus, it was African American history. I was really conscious at that time. I back in 19, so you want to say 79. I was going to hear people like Stokely Carmichael. I marched with Ralph Abernathy. I knew different people here in town that were involved with civil rights. A good friend of mine, Alvin Sykes, I knew him. He was heavily involved, and he took me over to SAC 20 to meet Bernard Powell back then. So I was socially conscious, and so I just merged all that into baseball and started to tell a story that people weren't getting.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and pivot to baseball real quick. So, can you give us a rundown of the history of the Negro League Baseball?
Yeah, sure. Negro League Baseball actually it started off as individual teams. Shortly after the Civil War, there were teams in Philadelphia. As a matter of fact, one of the famous teams was the Pythian Club. That was they were playing ball in the 1860s, but many leagues kept barring the African American players. And then in about 19, I want to say 1888, excuse me, not 19, but 1888, they started coming out with baseball cards, and they omitted all the black players from baseball cards, even though teams like the Cuban Giants were beating the teams and the players who were in the baseball cards. So baseball cards played a heavy role in the omission of African American history. And then as you come forward, we always had great teams around 1890s and 1890s. You're going to have teams like the Page Finch Giants who were out just simply outstanding, the Columbia Giants. And then Chicago and New York became the two meccas for where black baseball was played. And most of the players, even if you came from Kansas City or whatever, you were trying to get to Chicago or New York to join one of those famous teams up there. And those teams, not in a part of a league, they were independent teams, and they would tour around that region to small towns, taking on competition, minor league sometimes, or sometimes major league, but certainly a lot of towns had baseball teams during that time. Baseball is the big attraction. And so you could actually make a living going to these towns and playing, and around Chicago and New York. So that was kind of the nucleus of it. And if we want to jump way forward, those teams developed regional reputations, and those regional reputations allowed them to form the first lasting Negro League that was started in 1920 here in Kansas City. So it's a long history that goes back to 1860s. So yeah, we're well into 150 years of African Americans playing baseball.
Yeah, I was really surprised to see that the teams had formed so early and that there were professional teams in the 1880s. And I was also really surprised to see that the Negro League had been established here in Kansas City. I hadn't realized that.
Yeah, this is where they had the big meeting in 1920, and 8 teams formed what they call the Negro National League, and those were basically Western teams, teams from like 2 teams from Chicago, team from Dayton, Ohio, Indianapolis, St. Louis. Those were the teams that originally started here in the Midwest.
Well, so then my question is, if before this, if Chicago and New York were the highlights, right, the best, why did it start in Kansas City?
Well, that's a good question. Well, first of all, the meeting was originally scheduled for Indianapolis. And to this day, I don't know why at the last minute they switched to Kansas City. But Kansas City had a new YMCA building that was built in 1918. And it was kind of like the center of the community. And then also, because of Kansas City's location, it was easy for a lot of people to get there. I know Elijah Scott, the attorney who originally started the Brown versus Board of Education, a lawsuit he came down and was there from Topeka, and he represented
Really?
Gilkerson Union Giants. So it was just Kansas City is a good central location, and of course you had a vibrant African American community in Kansas City too. So it was a good place to come. If not Chicago, Kansas City would have been a great place.
Right. So, you said that. Sorry, one second. Excuse me. You said that we started in 1920, and the Monarchs were formed right away. So, what is the Monarch history?
Yeah, the Monarchs were actually incorporated or formed in 1919 with J.L. Wilkinson and Tom Baird. Now, Tom Baird usually doesn't get the recognition that he deserves as being one of the original owners of the Kansas City Monarchs. They had a 50% share. Mostly you hear about Wilkinson, but Tom Baird, who was from Kansas City, Kansas, in the Argentine district, who had been a pretty good baseball player, but he was a businessman and he was working out of Kansas City, Kansas, Argentine, Rosedale district, and he joined on, and he turned out to be a tremendous promoter. So Kansas City Monarchs started in 1920, and the things that the Monarchs did differently was, first of all, they played a lot of exhibition games. So, for instance, the first game that the Monarchs ever played, believe it or not, was played in Kansas City, Kansas, and that was against I think Davis Cleaners was the team they played, and then they left immediately and went down to Beloit, Kansas, and played their first exhibition games. And this was all before the Negro National League season started in May. So Kansas City started a history with barnstorming, and barnstorming is where you would go and you maybe play in a town for a couple of days, sometime one night. And it became a tradition with the Kansas City Monarchs, and because of that and their reputation, the Monarchs were able to last and outlast other teams. And I think the Monarchs, Tom Baird finally sold the Monarchs in 1950, and he was the sole owner at that time. Wilkinson had stepped out because of medical, but you can't tell the history of the Negro League baseball that started in 1920 without a vibrant addition to the Kansas City Monarchs.
I'm sorry, you said that he sold it in what year? 1950?
Well, actually, Tom Baird sold the team to Ted Raspberry in 1955, but J.L. Wilkinson
55, okay.
he sold his half share to Tom Baird in 1948.
So if Baird had owned the team for longer than Wilkinson, then why is he ignored?
Well, Wilkinson was a more colorful owner. He was at all the meetings. He traveled with the team extensively, where Baird pretty much stayed at home. And so Baird did a lot of the booking of the team. And so I guess when you're traveling with the team, you get more media, that kind of thing. So Wilkinson certainly had more media than Baird, but they were 50% owners of this team. And once again, I happen to be a person who knows a lot about Tom Baird. I knew his daughter. I went to his house where he lived, and matter of fact, I know two houses where he lived that still stand to this day over in Kansas City, Kansas. So Baird is one that I talk about a great deal. But once again, he doesn't get the ink. Now, the interesting thing about Baird, the Monarchs were started in 1922. 1920. But in 1922, there was an investigation in the state of Kansas, and they wanted to know how much the Ku Klux Klan had infiltrated, politics and things in Kansas. And so they went around the state and they put people secretly into these meetings. And it turns out that Tom Baird was a member of the Kansas Ku Klux Klan. At the same time, he was running.
Really?
Yeah. And that is in.
That is very interesting.
Yeah, the governor's records, because it turns out Kansas City, Kansas had the largest chapter of Ku Klux Klan. And of course, Kansas City, Kansas is my hometown, so I always have some interesting things to say about that.
Mm-hmm. So they did the investigation. Was there any kind of like, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, punishment for it?
No, but they were able to pretty much break up the Klan in the state of Kansas, which had grown pretty powerful by infiltrating it and knowing who was in it. But almost the whole city council in Kansas City, Kansas, prominent preachers, businessmen, they were all members of the Kansas City, Kansas chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. And that included.
Yeah, I did do a little bit of research into the Klan a while ago. I think I kind of remember reading that.
Yeah, there's a great book written by Tim Reeves. Tim Reeves, he's the curator of the Eisenhower Presidential Museum in Abilene, and there's a great book written by him and talks about the Kansas City, Kansas connection to the Ku Klux Klan.
Okay, yeah, I'll look that up. Thank you. So, there's another thing that made the Monarchs very special, especially to baseball history. They were the first ones to use lights, correct?
Yeah, they were one of the early teams to use lights. The Kansas City Monarchs decided, actually, let me go back, 1929, Haskell Indian College, just outside of, well, it's actually in Lawrence, Kansas, just outside, the city there. And Haskell Indian College erected lights in their football field. And J.L. Wilkinson had been thinking about lights for a number of years. Matter of fact, he had even tried some things back in 1915. So it's 1929, and Haskell Indian College put lights in their field. And Haskell was a kind of a football power at that time. I don't know if you knew Jim Thorpe had actually attended Haskell. So with those lights,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they played about 8 night games at the football. And so at the end of the year, J.L. Wilkinson went down and took his Kansas City Monarchs over there. They hit fly balls and all those things under the lights to see if it would work. And he liked what he saw. So in 1930, he erected some portable lights, and they were rushing to be the first team to play modern night baseball. But it turns out that the Independence, Kansas team brought in the House of David, and they actually beat the Monarchs in playing the first night baseball game. But they played theirs under permanent lights. So they had lights erected in the park, whereas the Monarchs had portable lights. And so the Monarchs actually started shortly thereafter. They played their first night baseball game in Enid, Oklahoma. But it was a few days after the House of David and the Independence producers team. But the Monarchs go on to play more night baseball games that year under those lights than any team. And they took those lights all over the country, and it was the first time that people had seen night baseball. So the Kansas City Monarchs get a lot of credit for pioneering night baseball because of the portable lights.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. And the fact that they're portable and able to take them across the nation, I'm sure other teams were like, okay, and then they got on board.
Sure, they took them to Detroit, St. Louis. The first night baseball game played in a major league park was Kansas City Monarchs against the Homestead Grays in Pittsburgh's field, the Pittsburgh Pirates Park. So yeah, they were monumental, no doubt about it. And 1930, they finished out that year in the state of Kansas, and they brought night baseball to places in Kansas, especially western Kansas, who had never seen night baseball. And it also helped to resurrect baseball because people were interested in how these lights work. So the crowds were big, and they were big during the time that the Depression had started to hit different parts of the country, and people didn't have the money, but they still came out and watched that night baseball.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the Depression. We'll come back to that in a second. I had a quick question for you, aside from that. Have you read the book Kansas Baseball by Mark Eberly?
Yes, I have. I have it on my shelf. I know
Okay,
it very well.
I thought you probably had. He talks about the field in Independence, and I remembered that, but I hadn't realized that they were a professional team. I thought that they were just like maybe a company team or a city team or something.
Yeah, they were a minor league team.
Okay.
Yeah, Kansas had minor league teams going back to the I tell you, going back to the 1880s. Topeka,
Yeah.
Topeka, and they used to be the Western Association, or what they would call the Western League. But yeah, there was a lot of minor league baseball played in Kansas, but there was also a lot of town baseball played in Kansas as well.
Hmm. So the Depression, you said that affected baseball. People were actually going, so it didn't affect baseball.
Oh, absolutely. First of all, it affected the players. Even at the major league level, it affected the players' pay. So at the end of the year, they were more eager to barnstorm against black teams because they can make a good extra payday. So it helped to basically break down some of the social walls that had been built up because players needed money. And in those days, they didn't get paid for the year round and that kind of thing. So when the baseball season was over, you might have to go back home and work in a factory, do whatever job you could get. So getting that extra pay
Mm-hmm.
playing against African American teams was a big deal. Matter of fact, I've written an entire book on that called the Dizzy and Daffy Dean Barnstorming Tour that took place in 1934. So, yeah, I really studied that period. Also, in 1931, a House of David, now they were a religious group out of Benton Harbor, Michigan, and Grover Cleveland came on and joined the House of David in 1931. Well, the thing that made House of David famous was that they leased the Kansas City Monarchs lights. So the Kansas City Monarchs weren't using their own lights in 1931. The House of David used them, and they made a fortune off the lights as well.
Is that Grover Cleveland, the president?
No, actually, funny, interesting
No.
thing you should mention that. Grover Cleveland Alexander was a great pitcher who had started around 1911, and he was out of Elba, Nebraska. And Grover Cleveland retired in 1930. And then he began to barnstorm with the House of David. Now, of course, he was named after a president. But what's interesting is in 1950, 51, a movie was made about his life story. And believe it or not,
Oh, really?
yeah, believe it or not, Ronald Reagan, who was an American president, played Grover Cleveland Alexander. How about that?
That's funny. What's that movie called?
It's called The Winning Team. The Winning Team, and
I'm gonna look that up.
Ronald Reagan, and in the movie, his wife was Doris Day. How about that?
Oh, I love Doris Day. Okay, I'm definitely gonna watch that.
Yes, The Winning Team. Yeah,
So,
baseball has all these little golden nuggets of interesting things that people don't often think about how they're connected.
yeah, it does. Something that is a passion of mine historically is Pendergast. So I'm sure you know he had his pies and everything in Kansas City during this time period. Do you know if he had any connections to the Monarch?
I don't know of any connection to the Monarchs, but I know in 1938, I think that was the year they sent him to prison. But the Monarchs had a pretty good season in 1938. This will happen to be Buck O'Neill's rookie year. The year they sent Pendergast to prison was Buck O'Neill's rookie year in Kansas City, but the city was pretty wide open still. And Kansas City was a wide open place. A lot of racism, but still wide open.
Yeah. So, speaking of Buck O'Neill, I'm sure that you met him and spoke with him several times before he passed?
I knew him very well. Yeah. One thing that people don't realize, people know him from the Ken Burns documentary. Well, I had done a documentary with Buck O'Neill 5 years earlier. I guess I'm no Ken Burns, so nobody remembers that one. But yeah, I had extensive history with Buck O'Neill, and many, as I did with many other Negro League players during that period. We're talking about the period in the 1980s when I was really working on a book called The Negro Baseball Leagues of Photographic History that went on to win the Casey Award for the best baseball book of the year. But what was interesting, it was held
Well,
back.
congrats.
Yeah, it was held back for 5 years before they released it. So
That's a long time. Why was that held back?
at that time, they didn't think that people would be interested in Negro League, so they held it back.
Mm.
They held it back, and I would never sign a contract where you could hold my book back like that. Of course, you live and you learn, right? Um,
Right.
But yeah, they put me on the shelf, and that allowed some other people to write some books because they had heard I was doing a photographic history. So several writers tried to get a photographic history out before me, but no one had done the research and the scholarship that I had done. And so when my book came out, it just basically made everybody else look like an amateur.
Well, he was deeply involved in the museum, and you are actually a co-founder. So can you tell us a bit about the museum?
Yeah, we started the museum in 1990. Prior to that, there had been an effort to organize a museum in Kentucky, and I'm
Sorry, you said it, organized the museum in where?
in Kentucky, and
Why Kentucky?
some players had a player reunion, and so they started. I guess there was conversation that we should start a museum, and so they started collecting some things. And in 1982, I went down to Kentucky, and I came back, and I told several people, including Buck O'Neill, that they're not going to make it. So we need to put the museum here in Kansas City. Now, what's interesting is that, that story that I just told you was covered in the Kansas City Business Journal. And at that particular time, it only mentioned myself. It never mentioned anybody else. And I probably was one of the few people who actually went to Kentucky to make that assumption that the museum didn't need to be there. And I came back, and that was the early origin of talking about a museum. And of course, talked to Horace Peterson. And Horace Peterson loved the idea of a museum coming here. He got behind it. And later on, Buck O'Neill got involved. There were several people, but in 1990, 5 of us went down and we incorporated the museum. And Buck O'Neill's name was at the top. He was the oldest, and I was the youngest. And my name is right under John Buck O'Neill's name. And let's see, out of that original 5, 3 of us are still living. And I'm still the youngest, and I'm still telling the history, and don't plan to stop until God said that's enough.
Who is Forrest Peterson? He's come up in previous research in the past.
Yeah, Horace.
Can you tell us about him?
Yeah, Horace was the director of the Black Archives of Mid-America. Horace was the original person who was really keeping Black history alive in Kansas City. He doesn't get enough credit now. He was the one who really got behind the whole Negro League Baseball Museum idea. And once again, Horace, there's still a Black Archive. Horace does not get the credit for what he did. He was also the first person to bring a Juneteenth celebration to Kansas City, Missouri as well. So, yeah, Horace,
really? Okay.
He owes a debt of gratitude to Horace Peterson, and he will probably never get the recognition. And a lot of people are getting recognition now who didn't do the work, who actually made some of this history come alive in Kansas City. So I guess my job was to talk about them, and Horace Peterson is one I would talk about.
Sorry, Are you saying Forrest, like F, or Horace with an H?
Oh, it's Horace. Horace Peterson.
Oh, okay. Just want to make sure I had that right. I think I said Forrest earlier, so I'm sorry about that.
Horace Peterson. He was a Central High School graduate and a very interesting man when it came to talking history. And back in the late '70s and early '80s, I did many programs with Horace. He did.
When the museum opened, did it open in the location that it's in now?
Excuse me, what's that question again?
When the museum first opened, did it open in the same location that it's in now?
No, it originally opened in the Lincoln Building. We bought an office in the Lincoln Building, and in those days we didn't really have any funds coming in for the museum. It was a concept, and so sometimes Major League Baseball players, Frank White might pay the rent for a month, or Willie Wilson might pay the rent for a month, and that's how the museum got going. And
Really?
yeah, so it very humble beginnings. You would have to be there to remember those. I think I was the first public relations person for the museum, and was able to get articles in Jet magazine back then, and and we just basically started pretty much in Black America talking about it, and that's how we got started.
Where exactly is the Lincoln Building?
It's across the street from the current museum on the corner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sometimes.
So when did you move into the current location then?
Oh man, that was in the '90s. I'm trying to think what year it was. Look, I got a couple of shovels from the groundbreaking in the basement. I'm not sure what year that was now. Seems like time just goes by so fast, but yeah, I'm not okay. Yeah. I'm drawing a blank on that one right now.
And are you still involved in the museum?
Yes, I'm the only person who signed the incorporation and have been in some kind of capacity with the museum for its entire existence. I'm on the what it's called. I'm kind of like on the celebrity board now, but I was originally on the board of directors. So, but I've been involved from day one, and so matter of fact, I'm getting ready to shoot a letter off to Bob here, email today, Bob Kendrick, current director. So yeah, I've been involved all the way through, and I go to many events, and I encourage other people to come to events as well.
Well, let's talk about your research and your books. You have a lot of books. What is your process for choosing a topic? How do you research it?
Well, that's pretty easy for me. For me, is I write books that I wish I could have read as a young baseball player, and I try to write them in the way that has the information that I wish I could find. And so that's been my whole philosophy. Write books that you wish you could have read, because I read a lot of baseball books. And unfortunately, when I first started, there weren't many Negro League books out there. And there's a lot of books out there now. But to be honest with you, some of those books are not books that I would even want to read today. So, and people have broken it down.
That's a good philosophy.
Yeah, and people have broken it down to where they might just talk about black baseball in Baltimore, or black baseball in Birmingham, or something like that, and they don't get the universal picture of what the contributions that black baseball players made to the whole country. So that's my philosophy, and that's the philosophy I still go with. My next book is coming out probably within the next month or two. And it's called John Buck O'Neill, the Rookie, in his own voice. And this, it'll take me a while to explain it, but you'll be able to hear John Buck O'Neill's voice in my book through the magic of QR codes.
Oh, that's amazing!
Yeah, and And these particular interviews come from interviews that were done in 1985. Yeah, keep in mind, this predates any Ken Burns and all this stuff. And so these are
Mm-hmm.
real early interviews with Buck O'Neil, and we're talking about some things that you never hear him talk about in later interviews. So,
Oh, that's going to be exciting to check out. Can you give us the title of that again?
yeah, it's going to be John Buck O'Neil, the rookie in his own voice. And those, just like when I did the photographic history, which was a groundbreaker, because in that time they didn't think you could find photographs of these black ball players like that. These QR codes and the voice of the players, it's going to be something you're going to see more and more and more. But I have lots of interviews that I've never released on ball players, and so I hope to release some of those interviews in this format because it's pretty exciting that we can do that. So I'm just looking forward to it. Now, I will say this because I would love to pick this conversation up. I've got another appointment. Is how can we pick this conversation back up? Because I know you got lots of questions.
I do have a few more questions. We could go ahead and stop here.
Okay.
And then shoot me an email whenever you're free later this month, and we'll talk again. Hey, listeners, welcome back. It's been a couple of weeks, but Phil and I were finally able to sync up our schedules to finish this conversation. And I don't remember where we left off, other than we were talking about your research. So I was looking at your website, and you have 8 books you have completed. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually 9. 9 includes a couple of revisions in there, and so I'm working on book 10 now, and it'll probably be about a month, and it'll be out.
Okay. And book 10 is the Buck O'Neil in his own voice, correct?
Yes. It's called John Buck O'Neil, the rookie, his words, his voice.
And I probably already asked you this, but what has been the greatest challenge you faced in your research?
Wow. Just, I would think it's just always trying to keep your information new and fresh. I think now a lot of people have come into this genre of Negro League baseball, and they're repeating a lot of the stuff that you may have written 30 years ago, and so they're rehashing a lot of your history. Of course, they don't give you credit for it, but that's what they're doing, and we call it in the writing business. It's the same cup of coffee warmed over. But I've been trying to give people new information, keeping it fresh, make it relevant, and just giving you something that when you can feel proud to read it, and you'll feel informed to know it.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite book that you've written?
Do I have other books that I've written?
No, do you have a favorite of the ones you've
do I have a favorite?
Written? Yeah.
Wow. I always say my latest is my favorite because it has my most current ideals and conceptions in that book, right? But if I had to pick a favorite from the past, it would have to be my photographic history because it took me about 10 years to put that together, and when I finished it, I think one of the Baltimore newspapers said this is a feat that'll never be duplicated, and 30 years later, it's never been duplicated. So I feel really proud to have come up with that concept, and actually, it was my wife's kind of concept a little bit, and I just put the finishing touches on it. She gave me the idea, and so it's a photographic history, but it has a lot of history in there. But the photographs, even when I look at them, I see things now that I didn't imagine I was looking at back then. And I've been looking at these photographs a long time. So that's kind of my favorite.
What did you do to get the photographs? Like, were they from private collections? Were they from other museums or historical societies?
Yeah, and in those days, people when I first started, people believed, and some of the historians like John Hallway, they believed that you couldn't find that many photographs. So Robert Peterson, who they talk about a lot, who had a book called Only the Ball Was White, they had only a few photographs. Most of them was grainy, that kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so I came along and being an African American, I knew the history of African American, collecting their photographs, right? So armed with that knowledge of my culture, I went out and I basically went door to door, home to home. They were, and some of them were in institutions, but there weren't any large collections outside of some that were in Cooperstown, and I think there were the New York Public Library had a kind of nice collection. But for the most part, there wasn't a lot of collection. So I went out and basically went house to house. All over the country. Did a lot of traveling when I was in my 20s, and that's where I got the pictures from. I would borrow their pictures, come in, make copies, send them back, and people would trust me, and I ended up delivering on a great book.
That's awesome.
Yeah, a lot of work. A lot of work. A lot of these guys now, when they do history, everybody wants to do history straight from the internet, right? But the internet can give you some things. It can give you some great leads. Newspaper online can give you a great lead. But it's nothing like actually going to these locations and talking with the people who lived in those communities for a long time, and they'll have legacy knowledge. It's a big difference. But most people they they don't get in their cars and make these trips anymore. And when I was doing this, I could go to anywhere in the country. It was no problem for me to go to Chicago and the parts that what people would think are the most dangerous parts is where I got my best information.
Yeah, I have to agree that the internet makes it really convenient, but there's nothing like going to the institution and doing the primary research, or in your case, like you said, talking to the children or the grandchildren of these players and
Right.
hearing about it from their perspective.
Yeah, and you could read one of my books and you could read the entire book, but if you talk to me, I can always say something that's not in the book.
Right.
And when you read the book, you may have questions. What better thing than to go to the author and ask the author about something that they wrote. And so interviews are really still the lifeblood of almost any history. Interviews and firsthand accounts.
Mm-hmm. Something else I've been curious about is, do you have a favorite player?
Wow, over the years I've had several. Growing up following baseball, my favorite player was always Dick Allen. Uh, I think he was playing for Chicago most of my high school years. Just a great player. But and in the Negro leagues, it'd probably have to be someone like Satchel Paige or a guy named George Wilson out of Palmyra, Michigan. He was one of my favorites. Also, Wilbur Bullet Rogan, who who grew up in my hometown, one of my personal favorites. And so
And who you have a book about?
yeah, I definitely have a book about Wilbur Bullet Rogan. And since he was from my hometown, there were a lot of people going back 40 years ago who actually knew him, and they gave me firsthand accounts of interaction they had with him and his family and things like that. So, boy, I was so happy I was able to capture that and put it in a book and tell his story in a most unique way, not just from newspaper accounts, but from people who actually knew him.
Amazing. And what is it about these players that makes them your favorite?
Sometimes it's the achievements they did. Sometimes it's the character of the player, how they overcame situations. Um, it's, it's not always about how great an athlete they were, um, but I guess it has a lot to do with when I read their history, how I can relate to their history. And a good example of that, like Buck O'Neill. When I first met Buck O'Neill back in the '80s, I had been a traveling musician. I had just come off the road a few years before that, and when we sit down to talk, we start talking about cities where he had been. And I had been in those same cities playing on the Chitlin circuit, what they call the Chitlin circuit. We were playing all black clubs in those places. And there was a lot of traditional black communities left in these areas. And so I was able to talk to Buck O'Neill in a different light because I had traveled and appeared in a lot of these places where the Monarchs had played. So those were instant connections. And O'Neill's one of my favorites too. Uh, he was a great guy, and I went to work for the Kansas City Royals, and he was one of the people who recommended me.
I feel like I remember you mentioning that in our first conversation. What was it you were doing for the Royals?
I was assistant director of public relations. So my
Oh,
job
okay.
was, to work with players, connect them to charities. I would also go on the caravan where we would go to small towns and throughout the Kansas and Missouri, Iowa. And, I don't, yeah, we did make it up in Nebraska around Lincoln and Omaha and stuff like that. But yeah, that was my job. So I was I was in there with those guys, and I was there during the period Bo Jackson was there, and I was there during the period that they were still winning. And I think in 19, I want to say 89 maybe, we drew the largest attendance in the history of the Royals that wasn't even surpassed until just recently in 2017 or 18 when they went to the World Series. So
Mm-hmm.
we did a lot of good things back then.
Cool. Well, I didn't have any other questions prepared. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
Let's see. Well, I would mention too that I do have a extreme knowledge in boxing as well, especially as it relates to Kansas City. Um, there's few people who know more about the boxing who have studied the boxing more that are still alive than myself, and so I'm quite interested in boxing. Matter of fact, I'm working with a guy right now. We're developing a story for the Star on Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion of the world, and
Right.
him
Is he
being
from Kansas?
yeah, he was here in Kansas City in 1898. Then he came back and he did a show in Kansas City where the Folly Theater is now.
Right.
It used to be the Century Theater. He was there for a week in 1912 and performed on stage for a week and had turnaway crowds. And also in 1921, he came back. He was in the federal prison at Leavenworth, and when they released him, he came to Kansas City. Went right through Kansas City, Kansas, came to Kansas City, Missouri, and he had one exhibition before he left at Billy and Bubble Park, which was in or the Argentine area. And I knew about Billy and Bubble Park because they played baseball there. And in that area, you have the like Colgate, Palmolive, and all these soap companies. So
Okay.
they had a park for employees. It was called Billion Bubble Park. A great name for a park. And he fought an exhibition there. So Jack Johnson has several fights here in Kansas City. No one talks about them, but we're going to talk about them in that article. It'll probably come out in February.
Cool. Yeah, I had no idea that he'd been here.
Yeah, yeah. There's lots of local history that is yet to be told.
That's the truth.
I do have an unpublished manuscript on a boxer by the name of Tommy Campbell, who is the winningest boxer in the history of the state of Kansas, who came from Kansas City, Kansas, and he grew up across the street from where I grew up. But of course, he was much older, but his mother was still there, and his mother used to take me to church. We called her Miss Nanny Hughes. and she took me to church and vacation Bible school in the summer and things like that, and so I guess she never thought about the little kid in the back seat because my sisters are going too. Is going to write your son's biography one of these days. I guess she never realized that, but yeah, and so I kind of write some of these stories because uh, first of all they need to be written. But my thing with people ask me, so why do you write about certain topics, right? And I try to write books and write them in a way that I wish those books had been there for me when I first started doing research.
Probably not because of the pandemic, but you were still doing a lot of traveling and giving a lot of talks before pandemic, right?
Oh my goodness, yeah. From 2013 to 2019, I completed a 200 city tour, and I drove all of it.
Wow.
Yeah. And what's remarkable about that, it really was more than two, 200 visits. But if I went to a city, I only counted it once. So, for instance, I went to Wichita every year. I went to Omaha every year, but I only counted it once. So you can imagine how many places I went. I probably made maybe 400 appearances during that period, 300 to 400, somewhere in there. I've never counted them, but I had made a lot of appearances, personal appearances, and I drove everywhere. That was the amazing part, and I even drove to Canada. And the interesting thing was when I went to Canada, I had 3 dates in the Saskatchewan province, and so I started off in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and I spoke there. And what I would do is speak in the evening, go back to my hotel, and travel in the daytime. So I think I went to Council Bluffs. I went to Algona, Iowa. Where else did I go? I went to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I know I went to Bismarck, North Dakota, Minot, North Dakota, Jamestown. Where else was I in there? I was quite a few places. Then, of course, I crossed the border into Canada, went to Estevan and Regina and Saskatchewan. And I was at Saskatoon. That's where I was. And but I spoke every day and traveled. Well, I spoke in the evening, but I traveled in the day. And that was a remarkable trip. I think I spoke like 14 nights in a row.
To be honest, that
Each
sounds
one in a
exhausting.
Yeah.
But I know that when
But you
it's
know
your
what?
passion, it's not as tiring.
Say that again now.
I know that when it's your passion, it doesn't make you tired; it invigorates you.
And the crowds, people would come out, and you would meet so many interesting people. And when you got there, you never knew what the venue was going to look like. And then I would also try to take in some of the sights. So, like when I spoke at Storm Lake, Iowa, on that tour, and a guy took me over to it was this ballroom. It was a ballroom where Buddy Holly, played 2 days before he died in the plane crash. And he took me to the ballroom, and they're trying to figure out what they want to do with it. That was in Storm Lake. Just so happened the pilot that was flying the plane when they crashed, he was from Storm Lake. So I would try to
Yeah,
take
weird
in
coincidence.
interesting sights. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So that was all for Negro League Baseball, promoting your books, talking about the history of this. And you have your website. Can you give us the name of the website?
Yeah, before I do that, I do want to make one thing. When I took that tour of the 200 cities, it was called the Kansas City Monarchs in our hometown. So what I did was talk about the Monarchs' history in that particular town. So it wasn't just like I just picked a bunch of towns. These were actual places where the Kansas City Monarchs had played or ball players had lived, that kind of thing. So
Oh, that's even
these days,
better. Okay, so hang on, I have questions then.
oh
So,
yeah, well,
um,
go ahead, well, yeah. I'll give you the website. We can go back to that, but go ahead and give me some more questions.
well, why were we playing in Canada? What was this?
Canada, Canada was a great a great place for baseball. The Monarchs played in Winnipeg. Actually, they played all over Canada. Um, there's more cities I would like to go to that I haven't gone to, but they played in about 3 or 4 of the provinces up there. I know they played Winnipeg a lot, Winnipeg, but the Monarchs were a what we call a barnstorming team,
Yeah, we
and
talked
so
about that before.
yeah, so
I'm just
they
really
probably
surprised that Canada was a big baseball fan.
oh yeah, Canada was great, and the Monarchs played there a lot. Is did other teams. So yeah, it's always interesting. But see, these are the things that that if you don't talk about them, people don't realize that it happened. And so it's just a joy to talk about some of this history. And then when you actually go there, and you know the other thing, when I would go there, people would show up, and sometimes they would have scrapbooks and pictures and advertisements. They would have things that there's no way I would have seen these particular items unless I had gone there. So
Hmm.
when you went, so you never knew what was going to happen. It was like an adventure every night.
Well, then on the flip side, were they playing down in Mexico or Puerto Rico or Cuba at that time?
Yeah, the Monarchs actually went to Mexico for the first time, I think, in 1930, maybe 33, 34, somewhere in there. So yeah, they played in Mexico. They took the whole team to Mexico, and they crossed down in Texas. They crossed into Mexico, and they would play there. So Mexico was a place, and then um, they would also have players, certain select players on their team would end up playing winter baseball, and they would go to Cuba. Bullet Rogan played in Cuba 1924. Um, and but there were lots of Monarchs who played in those places and set all kind of records as well. So Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, they had people from our great state of Kansas, you want to call it, or Missouri, that actually played in all those places by being a member of the Kansas City Monarchs.
That's incredible. Yeah, I knew about winter baseball, but I guess I didn't know for sure how far back in the history of baseball it went.
Yeah, the Puerto Rican Baseball League started in 1938. The Cuban Baseball League, Winter League, goes back to 1900, right in that period, 1903, 1904. Yeah, there's a lot of rich history out there.
And what other cities are on your list that you haven't been to yet?
Wow. Well, I'm looking forward to going to Winnipeg. I've never been to Winnipeg. I've written about it so much, but I've never gone there. And there's some places in the east I'd like to go that I haven't been there. I wanted to go to Paterson, New Jersey with my Dizzy Dean book. Then COVID hit, so I never made that. But
Hmm.
I like to spend a little more time in the east. Would like to go back to New York City. There's so much history there. And what's interesting is the way that I present my program and what I do in my program. Nobody does that anywhere. So, I nowadays, like I'm going to be doing some Black History programs. When I'm in person, I have a thing that plays music, and so I get out a track of Lift Every Voice and Sing, and I take my trumpet out and play Lift Every Voice and Sing. People are amazed that I'm an excellent trumpet player. So, and then every speech that I finish in public, this is when I'm doing one in person, I always end with poetry, and I'm not reading my poetry; it's by memory. And so people are amazed when they hear me doing poetry, playing the horn, and then I have all this other history about baseball, all this things, all these dates and people and places remembered in my head. I'm not using a sheet of paper. People come and they say, "Man, that's amazing." So
That
it's
does sound
great.
really unique. If we ever get out of this pandemic, I would love to come see you speak in person sometime.
Well, I'll tell you what, I was practicing my trumpet right before you called, so I will be ready. I will be ready, and hopefully one day we'll get back out. And I know I'm scheduled to go to uh, let's see, Brookings, North Dakota in February, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Uh, Years ago, I got caught in a snowstorm, and coming out of South Dakota, I said I'd never go back there again in February. So I don't know why I'm going there now in February. There was a heck of a snowstorm too. I had to drive 30 miles an hour in a blizzard conditions from outside of Sioux City to St. Joseph, Missouri, before I could actually drive the speed limit.
Ooh, that
That's
sounds like
good.
one of my driving nightmares.
And I was by myself, and just a long night. I remember this is before XM radio and all this, and I was listening to KOM radio out of Shenandoah, Iowa. So it's just amazing what you learn and what you remember as you reflect back on some of the experiences you've had.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, switching back to your website, what is that?
My website?
Yeah.
Yeah, my website, I launched it during the pandemic, and it's a NLB, like Negro League Baseball. So it's NLBalive.com. And if you go there, you can purchase any of my books. And of course, unlike Amazon, where you can purchase them there. But if you purchase them from my website, the price is the same, and I can autograph it for you. That's one thing
Yeah, that's
Amazon
a pretty
can't
good
do.
website. Did you put all this together yourself and you keep it updated?
Yeah, I keep it updated. I try to do blogs. Right now, I'm probably behind on my blogs because I'm trying to finish off 2 books. But I try to, keep people engaged. And of course, I have a Twitter page. It's called at Negro League Man. And so if you put that in there, and I used to put on daily facts about African American baseball players from 1900 to 1999. So try to find interesting things there. And of course, when I have the space, if my tweet isn't too long, I'll always put my website at the end of those particular tweets. So a lot of people find me there, and so we're up to over 10,000 people following me there, and it's still growing. But I think I'm going to get some new growth with my new books coming out, and I'm just excited. I'm just excited. It's been an interesting 40 years. If you can imagine 40 years of doing something.
No, actually, I can't. But I hope that one day I get to look back and say I did this for 40 years.
Yeah, and when I started, the years just seemed to go by, but I never thought that somewhere down the road, I guess I just went to work and just never thought, and then all of a sudden, time just passes, and then now you're 40 years into it, and people are talking about players, and you actually knew these players, and they don't. They're talking about them, but they never met them. So I was able to meet people like Cool Papa Bell and Hilton Smith, who's from here, who's in the Hall of Fame. Willard Brown, who played with the Monarchs, who's in the Hall of Fame. Oh, I met so many players, Buck Leonard, and sometimes I would go directly to their homes. So not only did I know them, but I spent time in their homes as well. Sometimes their wives fed me. So I ate dinner there too. So, but those are memories you can't take away. Great
Yeah.
memories.
Okay, anything else you wanted to say before we log off?
Oh no, that's it. I still have a passion. Every day I'm still learning about baseball and learning about American history. It's my life's passion. So I try to tell a great American story with my baseball stories. So, yeah, that's about it for me.
Well, thank you so much. Listeners, make sure you check out his website. Again, that was nlbalive.com and look him up on Twitter. What was that again? Negro League Man?
Yeah, at Negro League Man on Twitter.
Okay. Yeah. And really looking forward to your next book.
All right. Well, we're about a month out, so I'm pretty excited.
All right. Thank you so much, and cheers, everyone.
All right, then. Thank you.
Speaking with Phil was great. He is such a nice guy, so genuine, and he knows so much about Kansas City history, particularly the Negro Leagues. And he's just a pillar of the community, honestly. And I am amazed and in awe, and I think a little bit jealous of this lifelong project that he's been working on. I can't even call it a project, sorry. A passion. It's almost like a quest for him that he's been able to speak with so many people who were there, all of these players, and get firsthand accounts. It's truly, truly amazing and so vital. We are so we owe him so much. We are in debt to him for having done this. You can become a patron subscriber at redcircle.com/homegrownkc or patreon.com/homegrownkc. And you can also give a one-time donation at redcircle.com/homegrownkc or ko-fi.com/homegrownkc. That's ko-fi.com/homegrownkc. Everyone who donates will receive a shout out, but only those who are monthly subscribers will receive access to exclusive episodes like this one and merchandise from the store. If you want to check out what is available at the store, you can go to Zazzle.com. That's ZAZZLE.com/homegrownkc. Got lots of cool items on there. And make sure you like, follow, and subscribe to me on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, Tumblr, and my YouTube channel. You can check out my website. That's homegrownkc.wordpress.com. It is in the process of being updated, and I will strive to keep it updated in the future. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or episode suggestions, or you just want to talk history, you can email me at homegrownkcpodcast@gmail.com. I also have a new newsletter that I'm going to be doing. Probably once a month, you'll get an email that just says, hey, here's this new episode or a new feature maybe. I'm not going to spam you every day like some people do, so don't worry about that. You can sign up for that at my website. Thanks goes out to my talented sister-in-law, Sarah McCombs, for the creation of my logo. To the Dear Misses for the use of their song Kansas City as the intro and outro music of the show. To Bjorn and Joan for their continued support, and local libraries which enabled me to gather my research. And a very special thank you to Phil. Cheers.
Baby, and I just had to ask you this tonight, 'cause I can't seem to shake this feeling, and I can't seem to get you off my mind.